Little Babcia, My Hero, by Ethan Scot. I awoke in my favourite cosiest bed in my favourite cosiest pyjamas at lunchtime in our house in Poland. We had travelled through the night and arrived in the village at 3 o'clock that morning, and I was shattered. The village, Pławna, lies in the southeast of Poland, near the Ukrainian border. The village is stunning, with only 100 houses or so, a river, a train track, one shop, one school, and various members of our family scattered in different houses in the village. I rubbed my eyes and stepped out onto the balcony and reminded myself of how beautiful the fields and hills were, as I had been here so many times before. The tiles on the floor of the balcony were burning my feet in the hot midday sun, like burger on a griddle. As I ran inside off the hot tiles, my mum shouted up to get ready as we were going to see Babcia, which means grandma in Polish. She is actually called Little Babcia. She is my great-grandma, and as you would expect, is really small. I was actually nearly as tall as her at the time, as this was 3 years ago when I was 9 years old. We jumped into the car and made the short journey up the steep hill to Little Babcia's house. I was with my mum, Dad, brother, Grandad and Grandma. As we arrived, she was stood waiting for us at the back of our house, excited. She threw her arms around me and my brother Jacob. Her kisses were as sloppy as a typical grandma's, and she always hit the bullseye, my lips. We sat down in her immaculately manicured garden under the altanka, like a gazebo but made from actual tree trunks with a roof. The house sits on a hill in a valley with rolling hills on both sides. I commented on how I would love to walk the hill to my right, and little Babcia noticed me point to the top of the hill. She didn't speak English, so my mum translated for us. My pointing had prompted little Babcia to recall a fascinating true story, and before I knew it, she was reliving the events that happened just over 70 years earlier on that very hill. Although she was 93, she was as sharp as a razor blade. Her memory was better than my dad's, and she could still catch chickens with her bare hands. Her story began. The year was 1944, and the Second World War was in full flow. Poland was at the heart of the war, and the village was overrun with German soldiers. Every house had a German officer that they had to feed at mealtimes. Little Babcia's officer was polite, quiet, and on occasions he was discreetly kind. He would randomly slide coins under the empty plate, or place butter, sugar and chocolate in the larder which he had smuggled in inside his coat. No words except thank you were ever exchanged, and he could not be seen to be kind for fear of punishment. Little Babcia told us that at the time she was in her early 20s, and she had given birth to her first child a few months earlier, a baby boy called Zdzisek. Their family consisted of approximately 8 people living in their house. They were very poor, and their prized possession was the family cow, as they needed milk to drink, and it also doubled up as a free lawnmower, chomping the grass. The villagers were unaware that Russian soldiers had gathered behind the hill I had pointed at earlier. One day, little Babcia had taken the cow from the barn to the field to graze, when all of a sudden gunfire broke out from the hill where the Russian soldiers were, leaving her momentarily frozen in the middle of the field with her baby boy wrapped to her chest in a sling. This must be a new mother's worst possible nightmare. She heard loud cracks, followed by zipping sounds as bullets rained down, scattering areas of soil as they hit the ground around her feet. In a split second, she quickly thawed out her frozen brain and began playing the scariest game of hide-and-seek she would ever play, leapfrogging behind every tree available. She wondered why they were targeting her as she stood sweating and panting with her back pressed against a huge tree, big enough to protect her and her baby. She could only think that they had mistaken her for a German soldier from such a distance away. As the Germans began firing back from the top of their hill on the other side of the village, she realised she was now caught in the crossfire. Stranded in a field of trees, she felt helpless, but her only thought was to save her baby. She did not know if they were going to come into the field to find and kill her and her baby, so she decided to make a run for it. The barn, 50 metres away, was her goal. With a huge, deep breath, her heart was pounding in her mouth. She adjusted herself so she would be protecting her baby while she ran. Then off she went like an Olympic sprinter at the start of a race. She could hear bullets and remembers them hitting trees as she passed them. She decided not to stop, even when she felt one hit her face. They crashed through the door of the barn. Little Babcia then dropped to the floor exhausted. She had no idea of how bad the injury was to her face. She sat up and touched her aching nose, and saw blood dripping down onto the dusty floor of the barn. We were sat on the edge of our seats, gripped by the extraordinary tale we were hearing this frail old lady relay. She paused, silently leant forward towards me and my brother, and pointed to her scar on her permanently indented nose, proof of the tale, the evidence visible 70 years on. Little Babcia resumed the story and explained how she hid silently in the barn for 6 hours and breastfed the baby to keep him from crying, so they were not found and probably killed. When it was dark and safe, she carefully crept back to the house to tell everyone what had happened and where she had been. I sat in the garden and remember thinking that this had actually happened here, in this field and on this hill, a short walk from where we were sitting. I stared at the bullet scar on her nose. I was mesmerised. Wow! She went on to have 6 more children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, including my grandmother, mum, brother and me. Zizek is now in his 70s and has children and grandchildren of his own who I play with. None of us would have been born or would be alive today if it wasn't for little Babcia, my hero. I saw her one more time the following year, after which she sadly passed away. I was pleased I'd managed to stroke her brave little hand one final time.